morning, everyone. Welcome to the October 1st edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I'm David Aragon, and I'll be joined very shortly by my co-host, Craig Milkowski. The focus this week is Saturday's racing at Pimlico. It is the Preakness Day card taking place on October 3rd. Unusual this year, but that's been the case for the entirety of 2020 since racing's resumed the second half of the year. We're finally reaching the last leg of the Triple Crown after the Belmont and the Kentucky Derby were run. No Triple Crown on the line this year after Tisdalaw lost the Kentucky Derby, and few horses are even competing in all three legs of this Triple Crown. But this Preakness has nevertheless drawn a pretty interesting field. You've got the Kentucky Derby winner Authentic, as well as Art Collector, who was going to be among the favorites in the Kentucky Derby before he had to miss that race. He'll be the main challenger. Swiss Skydiver, that top 3-year-old filly, she's also competing. It's a pretty intriguing group, and we'll get to that at the end of the podcast. But we're going to discuss the entire late pick 5 sequence at Pimlico on Saturday, comprising races 7 through 11. The DeFrancis Dash, got the James W. Murphy, that race for 2-year-olds, the Laurel Futurity, and the Black Eyed Susan going as the race right before the Preakness. So, Craig, we're finally here. The Triple Crown is going to be completed on Saturday. It's been a weird year, but I think it's kind of amazing that we finally got to this point.
Yeah, I'm glad to see it. The Baltimore is my hometown, so I always have a soft spot in my heart for the Preakness. Looks like it's going to be a great race this year. And the whole card in general is just fabulous. Even some of the races we're going to talk about, not going to talk about that we were discussing off air that just are really strong and have some really interesting horses. But yeah, I'm looking forward to this card. Looks like a lot of great betting opportunities. Some interesting placement. We wouldn't normally see races like the DeFrancis Dash and the Laurel Futurity on the card. Make it stronger than your typical Preakness card even. So just really looking forward to digging into this one.
Yeah, it's a fun all-stakes card. Every race on this card is a stakes race. And as you said, there are some very good horses competing early in the day. I think the really tough handicapping races are in this pick 5 sequence. We're going to get to some of them. You've got some bigger favorites like Factor This and Juliet Foxtrot competing in the Gallarette and the Dinner Party earlier in the day. We're not going to discuss those, but plenty to look forward to early in the day at Pimlico on Saturday. We're going to start with race 7. That is the race that Craig just mentioned, the DeFrancis Dash. And oddly, this year, I think it's going to serve as a prep race for the Breeders' Cup Sprint, potentially. We were talking about that sprint division on the Pacecast earlier in the week, how this division is kind of hungry at this point. A lot of the division leaders just aren't going to be participating in that Breeders' Cup Sprint, so it's really ripe for the taking for anybody to step up with a top performance, and maybe the horse to do it is going to be the favorite in this race, Landeskog. At least he's the favorite on the morning line. This is a horse who's now 4 years old, but as a 3-year-old, he showed a lot of talent in Doug O'Neill's barn. He earned a big speed figure, went second to the promising King Jack in that Gallant Bob last year. Obviously, he was off for a long time, but now he's returned for Brad Cox. Won his prep at Ellis. Craig, how do you think he stacks up against this field?
I think on paper he's clearly the horse to beat. It's based on those 3-year-old speed figures that you mentioned. But that said, I don't think he's any standout in here. He's going to have to step up off that allowance win where basically he got a pretty cupcake trip walking and pretty slow time on the front end without being challenged. So it was more just a walk in the park, almost like a workout for him in my opinion. But that said, he ran a 116. He cracked the 120 mark as a 3-year-old, so he certainly is eligible to move much past that at this late in his 4-year-old season. So he's a horse, if I do play a pick 5, I'd certainly be using. The horse I'm most interested in is drawn inside, and that's Admiral Lynch. He's another 4-year-old, and he's got quite the interesting story. He's one of the few horses you'll find that was actually trained at one time by Jorge Navarro and then briefly by Jason Service. And surprisingly enough, he didn't really run all that great for those trainers. He was mostly just an allowance sprinter, picked up a few wins here or there, but he really seems to have blossomed in the barn of Michael Maker. He's run better and better speed figures in each start, topping out last out with a 122. He has good tactical speed. He can be on the lead. He can sit just off the lead, and he seems to run well. And that race has come back really strong. The runner-up, Honest Mischief, has already come back to win a race. A couple others in there have maybe not won, but have run better or similar speed figures than they did that day. So I have no question that the figure is really solid. So I would say Admiral Lynch is going to be my top pick in here. I still think he has some room to improve. A couple others to talk about maybe, and I think it would require the pace to really get hot up front. It could set up for Stan the Man and Eastern Bay. Both are in solid form. Eastern Bay's more of a versatile sort. He's a horse who actually has won on the lead, but last time he rated off of a slowish pace, not way off, but a few lengths off, and he was able to finish and beat some horses that are in this field. And Stan the Man ships in for New York. I don't think 6 furlongs is his best distance. That's why I say he would probably need a pace setup. But he's another I'd consider using because despite the pace projector not indicating a fast pace, and I agree with that, I do think it's possible, though. There are some speed horses signed on in here, and it could play out that a couple of them get ambitious up front.
Yeah, we pretty much agree on your top 2 choices in this race, Admiral Lynch and Landeskog. I have nothing really to add to what you said about Admiral Lynch. He's just a major contender in this race based on that last speed figure, and as you pointed out, there's really no reason to doubt that figure. It seems legitimate, and he might just be a horse that's really improving now as a 4-year-old. He showed talent last year in those barns that he came out of, and it seems like he's just been cycling up to this kind of effort for a while, and he's hitting his best stride, so I think he's a real danger in this race. I will say Landeskog is way the horse to beat from my perspective. I went back and watched that last race at Ellis Park, and I was looking at the form and kind of saying to myself, oh, maybe this horse could be vulnerable because he only won by a length and 3/4 over what seemed like an inferior field. He was 1-5. But when I watched that race, I mean, even though the margin was under 2 lengths at the end, he was just in command throughout. Florent Geroux really never asked him for his best. That was a pretty dominant victory. And I was looking up some stats for Brad Cox in Formulator because Brad Cox doesn't have the best stats off layoffs or long layoffs like that. They're okay. But I looked up his stats second off a layoff of 6 months or more, 180 days or more, with horses running on the dirt that actually won their race off the layoff. So one last out, second off 180 day or more layoff on the dirt. Brad Cox is 9 for 18, 50% win rate with a 272 ROI. So these horses that he gets to win off the layoff, when they come back, they typically win again. So I think Landeskog is going to be pretty tough in this race. It's just a matter of how short a price you want to take. He's 5-2 on the morning line. I could see him getting bet down off that into the 7-5 or 8-5 range. So we'll see how they bet this race. But they were just the 2 horses for me. I mean, if I was going to look elsewhere, Craig, you make some good points about Stan the Man. I wonder if he's going to run here because he's also entered in the Kelso, going a mile on Saturday at Belmont. And I know when they scratched him out of the Vosburg, they had mentioned the Kelso as the possible alternative. So I wonder if they're going to run there instead. If he's not in this race, I guess the best other alternative that I could find would maybe be Lakai, who is kind of a mainstay at Laurel and Pimlico circuit. He actually does most of his damage at Laurel, though. That's where they run most of the races in Maryland these days. It's kind of funny, Lakai's last 2 races, they've put him on the lead, and that's not really his running style. I think he just wound up on the lead because he does have some natural tactical speed, and he just found himself in races with no confirmed front runners. There is speed in this race, and I wonder if he'll benefit from getting some pace to close into, because while he's not a deep closer, it seems like he's the kind of horse that does like to have a target to run at. So I'm not sure he's quite this good. He's kind of a horse that once in a while throws up a speed figure that makes him competitive in a race like this, but he'd really need his best effort to beat those 2 aforementioned favorites.
Yeah, good point about Brad Cox on the layoff. I did mean to mention that as well. He definitely does better second off the layoff than first, so that's good info there.
Let's move on to the second leg of this Pick 5 sequence. It is the 8th race, the Laurel Futurity for 2-year-olds, going a mile and a 16th on the turf, and got a lot of unproven commodities in this race. A bunch of horses trying turf for the first time, some horses coming out of some minor stakes races. We've got even one European shipper making his first start for Graham Motion, and I guess Graham Motion is where we should start in this race because he does have 2 pretty strong contenders in the number 1 Pivotal Mission, who's actually a maiden, though a maiden who is stakes placed because he was second in that lucrative juvenile at Kentucky Downs last time. And he also has Wooten Asset, who's coming over from France. This seems like a private purchase, and Graham Motion does have fantastic statistics with foreign shippers in this country on the turf. So they seem like 2 of the top contenders in this race, but it's a pretty wide open affair.
It is. I'll start with the Graham Motion since you brought him up. I'm not particularly interested in Pivotal Mission. I don't know if he'll be the morning line, or if he'll be the favorite or not, to be honest. It looks like a pretty tough line to make to me. But if he was, it's just, I mean, he hasn't run particularly fast in his 3 starts. Normally, I wouldn't have a lot of faith in those Kentucky Downs figures, but I did time all those from video, and it just wasn't a particularly fast race, so I'm going to take a pass on him. I much prefer Graham Motion Chipper, as you mentioned, Wooten Asset. I'm a little leery because while he does have fantastic numbers, as you said, with 2-year-olds, he's only 1 for 6, and that one favorite was a winner, but it is a small sample size, so I'm going to put more weight in the bigger, just how he does with shippers overall. I'll be the first to admit when I was looking, saw he wasn't getting Lasix at first, I was turned off, and then I remembered that most 2-year-olds aren't getting Lasix this year at some of the bigger jurisdictions, so obviously it's not the usual negative it would be for me for a foreign shipper not to get that first time LASIK. So I guess if I had to make a top pick, it would be him. One other that I'll use is the 5 latest up. He's a horse for Jonathan Thomas, won his debut in an off-the-turf sprint. Gets grass for the first time. His figure was pretty low, but I don't think it means a whole lot in here. He was obviously meant to be on turf, and he's going to be a big price, so he's one that I would use. And then there is a maiden that I think has a big shot in here. Who is it? I'm forgetting his name now.
Hidden Enemy.
Hidden Enemy, yes, the 8-horse Hidden Enemy. He's actually run twice. He got a big number last time, a 102, which is the best speed figure in the field by far. So for Steve Asmussen, he's one I have to consider. Nobody's run back from that race, I believe, when I checked. And that wasn't an easy figure to make. I think they had some timing issues, as they did a lot of times on the inner turf at Saratoga at that 1/16 distance. But based on that number, I think he's a stronger contender than the morning line favorite.
Yeah, it's a very interesting race. I mean, I'm kind of on the same page as you about Pivotal Mission. It really depends on the price. He ran fine last time in that Kentucky Downs Juvenile. Just felt like watching that race, maybe he hung a little bit at the end. It seemed like he got a pretty good trip and had his chance to go by the winner and just wasn't making up ground on that horse through the entire stretch drive. And actually, the horses coming from the back of the pack were gaining ground on him at the end. So while he did have trouble too back in that maiden race at Saratoga, where he was kind of locked in traffic behind the top 2 finishers, I just haven't seen him taking that step forward that I'd want to see. So I'm not way against him here. I just thought others might offer better value. I've got no problem with Grab Motion's other horse, Wooten Asset. Those races that he comes out of in France, those 2 stakes races in his last 2 starts, seem like quality affairs. King's Harlequin, who won 2 back in July at Longchamp, he came back and won a Group 3 event. And the winner last time, Macaloon, the winner of that race at Deauville, he's 4 for 4 in his career. He's also has a Group 3 win to his name. So those seem like 2 decent fields. And while Wooten Asset was never in danger of winning either of those races, he was just kind of one-paced at the end. Typically that form translates pretty well when these horses come over to the United States. So I'm going to use him for sure. I mean, of the others, I agree with you, Craig, that Hidden Enemy, despite being a maiden, is a horse that you have to use in this race based on that speed figure last time. I mean, you can kind of question whether those horses actually ran that fast because it does seem like a pretty big number for the top 2 finishers. But watching the race, it just seemed like Restored Order, who was getting on turf for the first time, really relished the surface and just showed up with a big effort. And there were big gaps between the runners, which is usually indicative of a race that does get a high speed figure. And I mean, the one knock I'll have against Hidden Enemy is as fast as he ran in that race, I thought Joel Rosario gave him a perfect ride because he just saved ground every step of the way, was able to slip through inside of horses coming to the half-mile pole to allow this horse to make a move up the rail coming around the far turn. So I thought he gave Hidden Enemy every chance to win that race. Just maybe he ran into a better horse in the winner Restored Order. So I think he's definitely has a big chance in this race. The one other horse that I want to mention, you got a few horses trying turf for the first time, Craig. You mentioned Light Us Up, who has a smidgen of turf pedigree. He might improve. We haven't seen the upstarts do too much on the turf so far. But the horse that kind of stands out to me as the one that really could improve on the turf is the number 4 Kidnapped for John Service. Violence is a decent turf influence, and the Dam, she was really a turf router. So I think this horse has a right to improve on the turf and improve stretching out in distance. And kind of watching his last race when he won at Parks, he seemed to have one of those strides that's going to lend itself well to the turf course. It's just for him a matter of whether he can survive a faster pace, because it does seem like there's a little bit of speed in this field. So we'll see if he can improve on the turf at a bit of a price. But I was mostly going to focus on Hidden Enemy of the 8 and the number 3 Wooten Asset, and I'd use horses like Pivotal Mission, Kidnapped, and even the number 6 Arrest Me Red. It was an impressive winner sprinting on the turf as backups in this race. Let's move on to the 9th race, the middle of this pick 5 sequence. It is the James W. Murphy going a mile on the turf for the 3-year-olds, and this one drew a large field of 14 runners, really one of the most competitive races on the entire card at Pimlico on Saturday. It's kind of hard to know where to even start in this race because there are so many contenders. I guess we can begin by talking about the horses coming out of the Saranac at Saratoga. That was a race that was run over a very boggy turf course. I mean, the turf is rated soft. There was just a ton of rain that Saturday at Saratoga. Many horses did not handle the course. One horse who did handle it for sure, though, was the winner, Bye Bye Melvin. I'm just not sure how much stock I want to put in that race moving forward.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I did want to talk about some horses out of there. I wouldn't blame anyone for using Bye Bye Melvin, but he's not for me. As you say, he won in a bog. He actually picks up pretty significant weight off of that win. So I'm just not a big fan of his. Don Juan Kitten, who's the morning line favorite at 9-2, which we don't often see, but with this big 14-horse field, which, in case you're wondering, there are no also eligibles or MTOs. Laurel just has that big wide turf course that can handle these big fields. I thought Don Juan Kitten ran really well that day. He's a horse who handles any conditions. He has good tactical speed. And in a big field like this, I kind of like a horse that can get some early position and kind of avoid the tough trips that some others are surely destined to get when you have this many horses. So I am a fan of Don Juan Kitten. I bet him last time, thought he was home free, and obviously that didn't turn out to be the case. But I think he's got a big shot in here. Another horse from that Saranac that I want to give another shot to is Vanzy. He just did not handle that course whatsoever. The time before he had a big figure win. I'll be the first to admit it was with a dream trip. It was a same race with that Bye Bye Melvin came out of, who turned the tables on him that day. But as far as Vanzy goes, I'm just putting a big old fat line through that race. So I think at somewhat of a price he could have a shot in here. And the other horse I'm interested in is Monday Morning QB. I think he's interesting first time on turf. At TimeformUS, we give him a 96 breeding rating, but this seems like a good point to turn it over to you. And if you get the Monday Morning QB, I'd like to hear your thoughts on his turf breeding.
Yeah, our thoughts on the Saranac are very similar. I thought Don Juan Kitten ran an excellent race. He really set a legitimate pace. I know we don't have fractions in the form for that because there was a timer malfunction, but it seemed like he was really doing all the hard work up front, and he looked home free and just got really leg weary at the end over that demanding course. It couldn't quite hold off Bye Bye Melvin, who himself got a pretty good trip stalking those top 2 runners. The one thing I'll say about that Saranac that might be a slight knock against Don Juan Kitten is that the 2 turf races that we saw over that bog, I mean, they were on 2 different turf courses, but the Inner and the Mellon, both turf courses at Saratoga on that Saturday card, we saw a situation where it was just hard to make up ground. Horses that got out to the front seemed to have an advantage, especially in that Sword Dancer, where Channelmaker just wired the field and nobody else could even get involved in the race. You just see that a lot at Saratoga when the turf gets really boggy. It's just hard to make up ground. So maybe that worked in Don Juan Kitten's favor, but it's not like Don Juan Kitten doesn't have the back races to support that prior form. He ran really well too back in that mile race at Saratoga, beating an allowance field impressively, and even prior to that, he almost defeated Domestic Spending, who went on to win the Saratoga Derby, obviously. So he's just got rock solid form, and I do think he's the horse to beat. Like Craig, I would give another shot to Vanzi because he was just adamant from the start. I mean, he was never going to be successful after breaking slowly and finding himself at the back of the pack, and then couple that with the fact that he was racing over a boggy turf course that he apparently didn't like. I just think he's a horse that you have to give another shot to because that Jersey Derby was a really strong effort. I know that I questioned the figure for that Jersey Derby when he came into the Saranac last time because it just seemed a little bit too high to believe, but I've got to say, the horses that finished behind Vanzi, they've all run back to that Jersey Derby TimeformUS speed figure, so maybe Vanzi just really did run a fast race that day, and if he can carry over that improved form on firm turf to Saturday, I think he's a major player in this race. One horse that Craig didn't mention that I think is a major player in this race is the number 11, By Land and Sea. He has run just 2 times as a 3-year-old so far, but he showed a lot of talent as a juvenile, actually beating Don Juan Kitten when he won the AWAD at Belmont last October. He returned in a pretty soft spot at Parks off the layoff, won impressively. They tried to turn him all the way back to 5.5 furlongs in that Mahoney at Saratoga last time. He's a versatile horse, but I think 5.5 is just way too short for him. He'll be much more at home going the mile distance, and I think he's a major player in this race because he's got a pretty versatile running style where he can be stalking the pace or come from mid-pack, and I see a ton of speed in this race. You've got horses towards the inside like Sensation, that sprinter So Street, and the number 9 who I'm about to talk about, Monday Morning Quarterback, who all have speed and want to be forwardly placed, so I can see this pace really heating up, and I think By Land and Sea has the kind of running style to adapt to a faster pace situation. The horse that Craig wanted to get my take on, the number 9 Monday Morning Quarterback, he's an interesting horse because he's got the best speed figures in the field, though they're on the dirt. He does have real talent. I mean, he showed it in his first few starts. He actually even ran deceptively well behind Max Player in that Withers prior to the layoff because he blew the start of that race, had to rush up mid-race, got rank, and still finished well to be 4th after challenging for the lead in mid-stretch. He came back last time and just ran into a really good horse in Happy Saver, who reportedly is going to run next in the Jockey Club Gold Cup. So that was a very good horse that beat him last time. But now he's got to try the turf. And it's funny, imagining a sire that's, I believe, standing in Maryland, and they just haven't bred very many good mares to Imagining, so I don't know if we really know what he can do as a turf sire. Looking at the stats in Formulator, he's 6 for 47 overall with his progeny that have run on the turf. There's not a ton of turf pedigree on the Dam side, though the Dam is by Not for Love, who is a very good turf influence. So I don't really know what we're going to get from Monday Morning Quarterback. I'm not going to be surprised if he handles the turf at all, because it seems like he's got the kind of action and enough pedigree to handle it. I'm more worried about the pace, because as I said, there's so much speed to his inside. I just wonder what kind of trip he's going to work out.
Yeah, he was a horse I remembered from the Withers and that trip he had in that eye-catching movie made before being getting tired late, but then he disappeared for a while before coming back in that race at Laurel. Last thing I want to mention on this race, you mentioned the Saranac and not having figures. Normally a stakes race like that, when there's timing issues, I will time it from video and make the figures that way, but they did something different that day where they switched the courses, and they had never run that distance before on the Saratoga course, so there was just no point in that. So the figures you see are basically class ratings for that race.
One other horse I want to get your take on, Craig, one that I think could take some money in this race and does make a certain amount of sense is the number 1 Chocolate Bar, who's coming in off a very fast speed figure at Kentucky Downs last time. This would be his stakes debut, and you might look at that last race and say, well, he might have the running style to really benefit from a fast pace up front because he closed from last place last time. I'm a little skeptical of that last speed figure. Not that you have it way faster than anybody else. I mean, Beyer has it very fast as well. That's just one of those Kentucky Downs races that I don't quite trust because it just seems like one that came up a little fast for that entire field.
Yeah, it was one I was a little bit shaky on. As I say, Kentucky Downs is usually tough. I'm sure I timed it. I don't remember the specifics of it, but yeah, I don't know what to make of that race, to be honest. I guess if he floated up from his morning line of 6-1, I'd consider using him in vertical plays because the way he ran last time and given the pace set up, he could come running. But I'm like you, I'm a little iffy on that number, and if he's really as good as that figure says.
The next race in this Pick 5 sequence, the penultimate race in the sequence, is the 10th. It's the Grade 2 Black-Eyed Susan for the 3-year-old fillies going 1.125 miles, and This seems like one of the more straightforward races in this sequence because you're going to have a heavy favorite in the number 5 Bonnie South, and the fact of the matter is, if Bonnie South runs back to her Alabama last time, she's just supposed to beat this field.
Yeah, it's a big field of 11, and we have it coded as a fast pace on the pace projector. It does seem to be plenty of speed in here. So that seems to, just hit her right between the eyes. At 117 she ran in the Alabama would easily be good enough to win this race. And she's clearly the horse to beat. It's not one that I'm going to be strong against, but I will look to use a couple of others in here, mostly because I'm concerned that it's possible that Big Figure was kind of a suck-up second. Nobody else did much running in there. She just kind of picked up the pieces without ever really threatening the winner. So I'm always just a little leery of those kind of numbers and horses that have her running style. She's turning back a furlong in distance as well. So while I do think she's the most likely winner, she's not a horse I'm going to single. A couple others that I would use in here, Mizzenbeau actually interests me. She's a horse who has run well on the dirt in the past. She's been running on synthetic, but doing so with nice speed figures. And if she's improved as much as those figures on synthetic say, she would have a shot in here. The other one I'm going to use is Hopeful Growth. She comes out of the Kentucky Oaks, where her running line doesn't look like anything special, but watching the replay, I actually think she ran pretty well. She made a real nice middle move on a rail that I think was a bit suspect before tiring late. So as a price, she's one I'm going to want to have on my pick 5 ticket.
Yeah, I do think that there's a big gap from Bonnie South back to the rest, and I hear you with that being just a suck-up second last time behind Swiss Skydiver. She really was finishing at the end of that race, though. I mean, she was flying past Harvey's Low Goyle, and she galloped out well ahead of Swiss Skydiver. I mean, when you watch Bonnie South run, she's not the kind of horse that has it all together. She, hangs on her left lead sometimes. She's looking at the stands. She's just still a little bit green and kind of figuring things out, but I do think she has plenty of talent, and we saw that going all the way back to that Fairgrounds Oaks that she won. Even though that was a slower race, I mean, going back to March, she's obviously improved since then, and I just think that she's probably going to win this race, and she'd be my top pick in here. It's just a matter of how short of a price you want to take on the win end and how heavily you want to lean on her in a pick 5 sequence. There is a fast pace predicted on the pace projector. We'll see how much speed really develops in this race. The horse that you mentioned, Mizzenbeau, I mean, it does seem like she does some of her best running towards the front end. The number 9, Miss Marissa, wired a field at Saratoga last time, though. She's not a horse that has a ton of early speed, and the number 10, Landing Zone, obviously has speed in some sprint races, and she can go long as well. So I think all of those horses could be forwardly placed, but I didn't view this as a race that necessarily had to fall apart. Not that it does for Bonnie South. I mean, she just might win on talent alone, but we'll see how that develops. I agree with you about Hopeful Growth. I think of the horses coming out of the Kentucky Oaks, she is one that I think you could give a second chance to based on that trip. There just really wasn't much pace going on in that race, so I don't really want to fault her for losing ground at the end. She just has to improve to beat Bonnie South. I mean, the one horse that I would give a shot to, probably not to win, or maybe not, she's not a pick 5 horse, or if she is, like a C kind in an ABC wager, but more one that I want to use underneath is the number 6, Sharp Star. She's a New York bred who I admit that I've been chasing a little bit, but if you watch her last couple of races going this distance at Saratoga, she just hasn't gotten ideal trips. She was on a very speed-favoring course on July 22nd when she was trying to close, and then last time out, she blew the start, had to go wide into the first turn, then was really rank at the back of the pack, had to make a move on the outside on another day that it seemed like the rail was the place to be. So she's got some lower speed figures, but she's better than she looks, and I still think she's got a forward move in her. So I don't know if she's going to beat Bonnie South. That would be a stretch, but she's definitely one that I would use in exactas and trifectas. Now let's get to the main event, the final leg of this pick 5 sequence, and obviously the main attraction on Saturday at Pimlico, the Preakness, the final leg of the Triple Crown, going a mile and 3/16 for the 3-year-olds. And let's start with the favorites, Craig. We've got the Kentucky Derby winner, Authentic, and Art Collector, winner of the Bluegrass and the Ellis Park Derby. They were supposed to face off at the Kentucky Derby. Obviously, Art Collector missed that race with a slight setback, but by all accounts, he's training very well into this Preakness, and just based on speed figures and kind of momentum coming into this race, they're just way the 2 horses to beat.
Yeah, I don't have any knocks on Authentic. I mean, it's kind of hard to. He ran a really nice Derby. He set a fast pace. We have him coated in red. I mean, for Derby wise, it wasn't a super fast pace, but it was still really solid. And nobody was able to run him down. So his speed's always going to be a weapon, and I think he's one that you really have to use in here. That said, I'm going to make Art Collector my main pick. My top pick. I've been high on him all year. As you say, he missed the Derby with a minor setback, but just going back and watching all his races, he's on a 5-race winning streak, 4 races this year, and he's just winning them all so easily. I can't help but think there's more in the tank for him. I think he's just going to give Authentic a real challenge and is going to offer much better odds. So he would be my top pick. A couple others I did want to talk about in here. Pneumatic is definitely a price horse I'll use. I think he had some excuses in the Belmont. Didn't particularly run his race that day, but he came back with a really nice win in the Pegasus, a race which the speed figure looks totally legit when you look at all the horses that have run back from there. And I think with any more forward improvement, he could be a real player in the end, and certainly a horse you want to use in the verticals. I'm torn on 1,000 Words, to be honest. He had that big figure last time out, but then he acted up on Derby Day, actually flipped in the paddock in a pretty ugly scene. And my big question with him is, how is he going to deal with his stablemate Authentic? Are they going to be ridden and go at each other? I doubt that would happen, and it just seems like his best way to win. So it's kind of hard for me to picture Authentic trying to read in here. So mostly I would say I'm a guess 1,000 Words. Maybe if he drifted way up in price and somehow got overlooked, I would reconsider. But he's one I probably won't use in pick fives because I won't know what his odds are going to be, obviously, when I play. The one I'm definitely not going to use and am against is Swiss Skydiver, coming out of that runner-up finish in the Oaks. She's just had a long, hard campaign. Seems like she's running over and over again. And while her Oaks figure looks okay, it just seems to me like she's finally starting to tail off a little bit. I saw some signs of that in the Oaks. I'm interested to hear what you think about it, and I expect to see a little more of it in the Preakness.
We have a similar take on these two favorites, Art Collector and Authentic. Authentic is just the horse to beat. I mean, if he repeats his Derby, I think both of us agree, he's probably going to win this race because that Derby speed figure was high, and he really ran that day. The one thing I'll say about the Kentucky Derby is, for such a large field, Authentic didn't really have to work that hard to make the front end. I mean, he didn't even break that well, and he just kind of easily got to sidle up on the outside to take over without much trouble. John Velasquez didn't really even have to push him to do it, and the other riders were just kind of content to let him take over. Now, part of that is that Authentic has plenty of natural speed, and he was able to do that, but he also did kind of get a bit of a breather midway through the race. And look, he ran better than Tiz the Law because Tiz the Law also got a great trip in the Kentucky Derby. I just wonder in this race if there's somebody that's going to try to apply more pressure. I don't know who it's going to be because there's some speed in this race. There's not a ton of speed. I mean, I could see them getting much more aggressive with the New York traffic this time because for some reason they just let Authentic go in the Kentucky Derby, and that didn't really work out for New York traffic's chances, so I could see them going to the lead with him. I mean, even Art Collector has the speed to be in front. It's depending on whether they want to use it from his inside post position, but if they want to hold that position, I think they'd be wise to send him away from the gate a little bit. And I mean, Swiss Skydiver, I doubt she's on the lead, but she also has plenty of tactical speed to at least press the pace. So all of these horses, I think, could apply more pressure to Authentic this time. I'm not saying it's definitely going to happen. I just wonder if this race will be run a little differently than the Kentucky Derby was. But if Authentic holds his form, he can just win this race again. Art Collector, I'm on the same page as you. He's been visually impressive. He does have to prove it against really tough competition. But you look back at that Bluegrass, and horses have come back out of that race to run well and certainly validate the number that Art Collector ran. And I just think he's in top form right now and has that versatile running style that's going to make him dangerous. I am not against him by any means. I think he's a major player in this race. So I'm using these two favorites. I wanted to look elsewhere for some long shots. Admittedly, I had trouble really settling on anybody. I did pick somebody else in this race at a price, but mostly just because of that, looking for some value, because I do think that they're going to bet these two favorites pretty heavily. You mentioned that one Steve Asmussen horse, Pneumatic, and I was talking to somebody else about this who also likes this horse, and I don't know. I don't quite see it with this horse. I know we got a big figure in the Pegasus last time. My take on Pneumatic, though, and I don't want to be too hard on him because he's going to be a price in this race. I don't want to knock a long shot too much, but I've always been of the opinion that this horse is just strictly a miler. He's got a sprint pedigree on the dam side, and he just doesn't really finish off his two-turn races the way that I want to see. He got a pretty good trip, I thought, in the Belmont and just kind of fell apart in the last eighth of a mile. Even in the Pegasus last time, he took over like he was going to win that race by 5 lengths, and he just in the last 16th kind of tied up a little bit. I haven't seen the signs from that horse that he's going to get better with added distance, so I had some reservations with him. And of the Steve Asmussen horses, I strongly prefer Max Player, and I'm going to make Max Player my top pick. I will say, I know I've been chasing this horse for a while, and I'm kind of getting a little sick of him because I've been waiting for him to take that big step forward. But I do think that Max Player didn't have the best trip in the Kentucky Derby. He obviously broke a little bit slowly from that rail post position, was way back in the early going, and we talked about this on the Pacecast recapping the Derby, that the fractions look honest. We did not see a whole lot of movement from the back of the pack in the Kentucky Derby. I mean, Honor AP got some accolades for closing from so far back, but he did it with an outside, unencumbered run into the race. Max Player had to deal with way more traffic. I mean, he was down inside, taking dirt in his face early, had to deal with a little bit of adversity coming to the quarter pole, had to kind of pause and angle out around side Honor AP as he moved past him at the quarter pole. And I thought Max Player was finishing up well at the end of that race. Obviously, distance is not a concern for him. It's just a matter of whether or not he can stay a bit closer to the pace, and in that regard, I think Paco Lopez could be a really good fit for this horse because Max Player is the kind of runner that can't get a passive ride. He needs an aggressive ride. He needs to start that move at about the half-mile pole to have any chance, and Paco's the kind of rider that's going to make sure that he's getting into the race early enough because that's just how Paco rides. So I think Max Player, he's not that far off the top contenders on speed figures, and if he takes that step forward and gets the trip, he could be a player in this race at a big price. I don't know if we're going to get that 15-1, but if he's around there, he's the horse that I want to bet in this race. The others, I just couldn't really latch on to. I'm not going to be shocked if Swiss Skydiver runs well. She's certainly surprised me in the past, and I've kind of been saying what you have just now for a while, that she's overdue to take that step backwards. I don't think she's really done it yet. She ran fine in the Kentucky Oaks. I'm not sure even with her best race if she stacks up against the top contenders in here.
All right, sounds like we have one of Andy Serling Big A type lunch bet with Pneumatic and Max Player, so we'll be sure to bring that up on Tuesday. No, you make some good points. They're both going to be a price, so no problem with those. Just really looking forward to this whole card, not just the 5 races we talked about, but as you see, I mean, we spent plenty of time talking about them. I think it's going to be just a great card and a lot of betting opportunities, and not sure if I'll actually play a pick 5. Some of these races are probably look so wide open, but most likely I will. If I do, I'll put it out on Twitter and mention the horses I'm really going to key on. But just looking forward to Saturday, and good to see racing big back in my hometown.
Yeah, it's an exciting day of racing on Saturday. I mean, obviously the Preakness card is just stacked with courses. I'm also looking forward to what's going on at Belmont. We're obviously not handicapping those races now, but there are 5 graded stakes taking place there. I'll be doing my usual betting strategies package with Mike Beer on Saturday, so if you want to check that out, the information's on DRF.com. We'll be handicapping all of those races in great detail, but this Pimlico card is excellent, and I do think this pick 5 sequence is pretty playable. Obviously, those 2 turf races in the middle, the Laurel Futurity and the James Murphy, they're pretty wide open and tough, and you might have to spread in those races, but I think the surrounding dirt races, you can narrow them down quite a bit and kind of focus on some of the horses that we highlighted, and especially if you lean on Bonnie South, then the wager becomes much more playable. So it's a fun sequence, and hopefully we gave out some good opinions on this podcast. Thanks for listening this week, everybody, and we'll be back to recap these races and the Preakness, obviously, when we do the TimeformUS Pacecast next Tuesday. So look for that next week. Remember, you can always listen to these podcasts on DRF.com, Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, and SoundCloud. Wherever you get your podcasts, just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Thanks for listening this week, and look out for that TimeformUS Pacecast next week.